Welcome to the Red Path. Hello and welcome to the Red Path. Today we're going to dive into some competitive stats and look at the results of a fellow World Eaters player, Mr. Victor Hultling Sjöberg, a competitive player from Sweden and long-time member of the World Eaters Legion Facebook group. Victor recently took part in the Grimdark Invitational just outside Stockholm in Sweden, ending up third overall in a tough 26-person event with some top-tier lists on display. He somehow managed to take our Berzerkers on a 3 out of 3 winning spree and was gracious enough to answer some questions, so we might all learn a little something from his victories. I reached out to Victor and asked him a series of questions which I'll read out shortly. You can search up the event in the BCP app and search for Grimdark Invitational on 10/17/2020. Just leave the location blank and check the scores and lists for yourself. I'll provide my thoughts on Victor's success afterwards and how I'm going to learn from his experiences. So without further ado, let's begin. First I asked, what are you looking for when you build a World Eaters list in 9th edition? What follows is an edited version of Victor's response. This is a good question. I don't really know. We are World Eaters and melee is our thing, but in 7th and 8th edition it didn't work that well because of the missions and the terrain. Now, in 9th edition, and a new mission system with primaries and secondaries, just moving and fighting will not work. So now we have to focus on the objectives. Hold them, keep them, take them from our opponent, threaten our opponent from taking them from us, and deny our opponent from scoring primary points. So I need small and cheap scoring units, fast and powerful melee units, and units that can wait in the backfield for countercharges. At the same time, I need something to take the battlefield and score secondaries. So, Hellbrutes, Warp Talons and Berzerkers in a Rhino wait in the backfield for a countercharge. You can also put the Rhino in the middle of the board just to have a threat range with the Berzerkers. Mutilators, Terminators and a Chaos Lord in Terminator armor for taking objectives in my opponent's side of the board and my secondaries. Then we have my summoning points. I only summon Bloodletters because they can do the same thing that Mutilators and Terminators can do, but they can do it in turn 1. Take an objective, attack hard in turn 1, or just be a speed bump. Next I asked him about how he built his list and did he build it with any secondary missions in mind? Yes. Deploy scramblers, engage on all fronts and raise the banners, because they are a good combination with the primary objectives and the 2 actions are a good combo with engage on all fronts. So 2 secondaries are almost always easy to take. It's the 3rd one that is difficult. Following that I asked him, walk me through your reasoning for Warp Talons, Hellbrutes and Mutilators. I can see the value of Hellbrutes but have been dismissive of Warp Talons in 9th edition. But they obviously worked out for you. So, what led you to these decisions? About Warp Talons. I got my ass kicked by a Blood Angel just 3 days before the tournament, and so I thought that I needed a good counter for a quick threat. And now Warp Talons get another attack, with 5 attacks each on the charge and AP -2 with re-rolling wounds, and being able to charge over models and jump over ruins. They're a really good counter. Not to deep strike and charge 9 inches, but to have them waiting behind ruins and be a good and fast counter attack. Hellbrutes are cheap and they do not degrade, and with a twin las cannon they can be good at both range and melee. If you're brave enough, or if your opponent doesn't have a lot of range anti-tank weapons, then you can easily deploy them and use the Fire Frenzy strat. In the tournament and other games I have them in the backline with my Chaos Space Marines or Cultists holding objectives. Sometimes it's the Cultists and Marines that guard the Brutes, not from getting killed, but if something with OBSEC charges a Hellbrute, then the Cultists or Marines have OBSEC even if there is only 1 or 2 left after my Hellbrute has killed 4 to 5 of those enemy models. And with a Power Scourge, the Hellbrute hits extremely hard, 9 attacks on the charge with Strength 8, AP -2 and Damage 2. Mutilators. My first thought was that we can't use Obliterators the best way Chaos can and shoot twice, but we can fight twice with Mutilators. But then I played another tournament in Sweden in a city called Umeå, and the list I used there was similar to the one I used this time. But in Umeå, I had only 1 Mutilator unit. I realised that they are great to just deep strike for engage on all fronts and deploy scramblers. Then I and my friend who plays Genestealer Colts talked about that you need a really good way to pull the secondaries off, like engage on all fronts or deploy scramblers, and I realised that Mutilators are perfect for that. They're 3 models, they have 3 wounds each, a 2-up save and a 5-up invuln. They're not easy to kill if you don't have really good range weapons, and they're also a small unit so you can hide them. Following this I asked him to give me a basic rundown of how each of his 3 battles went and if there were any crunch moments. First is the Death Guard. So the opponent takes the first turn and I pre-game move my cultists up close to one of the objectives, closer to the middle on the right side of the board, behind a ruin, not touching it. My Dark Apostle with them for deny range with the Brass Collar of Borgasta. I also pre-move my Marines to the other objective on the far right. He takes all the objectives that are not within any deployment zone with non-objective secured units and then shoots a little with his Plague Burst Crawlers. In my turn I take all the objectives that are in no man's land and still keep those in my own zone. he will get 0 points in his turn. I summon Bloodletters and charge his Rhino that is on an objective marker because they have objectives secured, and there's 20 of them. And that is my plan for that game, keeping him off my objectives and make sure that I always get at least 5 points more than him on primary objectives. I move my units without objectives secured on those objectives where he has units that also don't have obsec. It doesn't matter if my unit dies in his next turn as long as he does not get any points. And on those objectives where he has units with obsec, I charge him with my units that have obsec, or just remove his units. Then he started to get a little bit too close to my deployment zone. So I deep strike one of my mutilators into my deployment zone and my Terminators and Chaos Lord in his deployment zone. In turn 3, I deep strike my second unit of mutilators in his deployment zone and deploy Scramblers. Khan, the Warp Talons and my Dark Apostle kill his Plague Marines, one of his Sorcerers and a Blightspawn. My Chaos Lord in Terminator armor and Terminators and one of my mutilators take his backline slowly. One thing I did that was really good was when he took the objective closer to the middle on the left side with one Rhino turn 1. I moved my Rhino without Berzerkers. They were waiting in my deployment zone in a ruin with no windows, so he would not get that point if I would fail my charge with my Bloodletters. I didn't do that move again with an empty Rhino that tournament, but it's a move I will remember and will probably use again. Versus Thousand Sons and Alpha Legion. Now this was scary because of my opponent's mobility, psychers and firepower. But I did as I did against the Death Guard. I paid CPs to move the Cultist, Khan and my Apostle. He won the roll-off and let me go first. So I moved and held 3 objective markers and started to raise banners with Cultists, Marines and Dark Disciples. I summoned Bloodletters and made a first turn charge. They hit the little Psyker castle he'd made in a ruin and captured his objective in his deployment zone. Then I just continued to take objectives. I did everything I could to hold the objective my Cultist took in turn 1 throughout the whole game. My Terminators deep striking close to the middle of the board. One was within 1 inch of Khan for his aura and they shot his Havocs, and then in turn 3 started to move towards his deployment zone and his Demon Prince. One of my Mutilators and my Chaos Lord deep strikes in and takes the other objective on the left side of the board. He does a little bit of damage but not enough. When it was my turn 3 I realised that I don't have to care about the objectives in my deployment zone, so now I switch battleground. I only care about the objectives in between our zones and those that are in his zone. The only unit that is returning to my zone is a unit of Berzerkers to kill his 1 Sorcerer for the Abhor the Witch points. To change battleground for us is really good because we want to fight and get in close, so if you can abandon your deployment zone and objectives in your zone, then do, especially if your opponent is slow. And that is how I won my second battle in the tournament. Raise banners, keep the objectives in no man's land, and take his objectives in his zone. And use 2 CPs to keep a Cultist on an objective is really worth it. Versus Blood Angels. Both of us realised after and during the match that pick and deploy Scramblers is a bad idea in this mission. The deployment zones are too small, but I tried to play as I did in the 2 previous games. My main plan was to hold the 2 objectives closer to my zone and the middle into round 3 and then try to switch battleground with 70% of my army. I tried to get a first turn charge with my Bloodletters, but when that doesn't work I just put them on the objective in the middle of the board. I pay 2 CPs to pass their morale check after my opponent charged them with Sanguinary Guards. I managed to hold my 2 objectives closer to my zone almost the entire game. In his round 4 he takes one and gets 10 points, but up to then I'd got primary points round 2 through 4. He only got primary points in 3 and 5. I never managed to switch battleground and none of us got deploy Scramblers because of how small our zones were. But I won 52 to 49. He almost caught me up with round 4. After this I asked Victor what were the biggest challenges you faced in your battles. His reply was this: the biggest challenge is always picking a 3rd secondary. I just don't know what is good. It's hard to build a good World Eaters list for 3 secondaries, in my experience. The other thing to know is when it is time to be aggressive and when not to be. I've noticed that if I can get the first turn, I should not try to attack with my main forces. Only Bloodletters if I can, because there's 20 of them and they have objectives secured and they can do a good amount of damage and take an objective. But otherwise I just take those objectives that are close to me and prepare for the next turn, and then deep strike with my Mutilators, Terminators and Chaos Lord and Terminator armor. I also asked him what he thought he might change about his list. His response was this: the only thing I'm thinking of changing right now is one of my Chaos Space Marine squads. I have 1 Cultist unit and a Marine unit. The Marine unit is equipped with a Combi Plasma and a Power Fist on the champion, and 1 guy has a plasma gun. The rest of them have just got bolters. I think I'll replace them with another unit of Cultists, or remove the Combi Plasma from the champion. But I don't know. With 2 Marine units I can keep holding objectives longer because of the armor save, but with Cultists I can use Tide of Traitors, and to be more flexible and secure deploy Scramblers, engage in all fronts and other secondaries. That's the only thing to think of right now. Finally, I asked him what advice he could give to players looking to try out World Eaters competitively. His response was this: stop considering World Eaters as an attack army. Instead, consider us a counter-attack army. Deploy and put your units for an ambush, not tactical reserves. What do I do if my opponent takes an objective from me? We're a melee army, and if you capture an objective with, say, cultists, your opponent has two choices. First, shoot them off the objective and no one gets that point. Or move within 3 inches of the objective and charge the cultists holding it. If your opponent charges or moves within 3 inches, then you have to have a unit that can come out of hiding as a countercharge. It is better that no one gets the points than your opponent gets the points. And another piece of advice, use apoplectic frenzy. Not to move and kill, but to take objectives, or if you go second, put your scoring units behind a ruin or something else, and then in your first turn, take your opponent's objectives. And then of course build an army for at least 2 secondaries. Right now it's hard to build an army for 3 secondaries. So I just first of all want to thank Victor for taking the time to answer those questions for me. I'm now going to offer my thoughts on what he said and what I think we can learn from that. Okay, so now I'm going to give my thoughts on Victor's responses to me. First, he's completely correct with his opinion on how to play the mission. Killing is no longer enough. We have to take primary objectives and score secondaries. And here again, he's also correct in that the third secondary choice is especially difficult for us. Engage on all fronts and deploy scramblers are very good choices, and raise the banners instead of scramblers may occasionally be necessary, as Victor alluded to. The third choice is always going to be reliant on how well you, the player, knows your opponent's army, the mission, and your own army. With regards to his controversial, in my opinion, unit choices, I thoroughly enjoy being proven wrong. It means there's still a lot of efficiency out there to be squeezed out of our dated codex, and previously discarded units now have a place again. With the advent of 9th edition, I instantly recognised the utility of things like the Defiler and the Forge Fiend, tough units that can hog a centre field objective and still shoot. But Mutilators, having the inbuilt deep strike and pretty decent resiliency at a mere 105 points, is such a great choice. I still think I disagree with his choice of Warp Talons. I think Raptors are slightly more efficient, especially as I think going cheap and trying to grab third point for engaging all fronts and the deploy scramblers in the enemy deployment zone is a good enough use of 90 points. However, Victor used his Warp Talons as a countercharge unit, which was perfect for them. They're still overcosted, but perhaps, when played well by a good player, some of that inefficiency is ameliorated. I also really liked his use of summoning. It's just something I haven't really thought about in a long time, but Victor really figured out how to maximise its efficiency between a scout move in HQ, redundancy in controlling an objective if the charge failed, and the primary hope of a turn 1 charge. This is what top tier competitive thinking looks like, folks, and I absolutely concur with him on the importance of knowing when to be and when not to be aggressive. The strength of a combat army is in the killing blow, but with the nature of reserves, progressive scoring, and a competent opponent, a turn 1 massacre will likely not occur, and also likely leave you overextended and unable to defend against a strong counterattack. It's certainly better to plan for a defeat in detail assault, throwing bloodletters up early to tie enemies up and claiming centerboard objectives, and then unleashing wave after wave of countercharge, ensuring you retain board control and ultimately victory. So thanks again to Victor for answering my questions and for giving all of us something to aim for and learn from as we take the fight to the enemy, to prove that the World Eaters can truly be a force to be reckoned with. As ever, stay safe, stay healthy, and kill, maim, burn.